Creetown sits alongside the Cree estuary from where it got its name, looking across to Wigtown on the other side. And like many people, I suppose, I always thought of Creetown as somewhere to pass through. But when I went there to meet and talk to the people who give Creetown its character, I discovered a vast wealth of history and found I had more links with the place than I had realized. Those who live there enjoy it particularly for the gentle village way of life, the spectacular views out across the estuary and into Wigtown Bay, and the warmth and fellow feeling of Creetonians. That warmth is almost tangible, and everywhere I went while making this programme I met with a cheerful welcome and a great deal of information, although sadly, as usual, half an hour or so is just not long enough to tell it all. I hope, though, it will whet your appetite with its colourful smuggling history and the many and varied activities that take place there. Creetonians are proud of their history, and many are intent on preserving it and passing it on to the next generations, and one man in particular has done his bit both to make it and to preserve it. Known, I discovered, as Mr. Creetown, Drew Murray has a pretty special place in the hearts of local people. He knows the history of the town inside out and has himself been involved in every aspect of Creetown life for over 70 years. I asked him if he was born in Creetown.
Yes, I was born in Creetown quite a long time ago. I was 5 in 14. That was when the First World War broke out. Well, I can remember seeing the local territorials marching to the station under the command of Adam Burrell.
That was Creetown Station.
Creetown Station, yes, which of course is no more.
And you can remember that?
Oh yes, I remember that very clearly.
What else can you remember?
Oh, I can go way back to the days when the quarries were much busier than they are now. But the big days of the quarry, of course, were before my time. In the days when I was a boy, the granite was hauled from the fell quarry with a steam engine and 2 or 3 huge wagons behind it with great granite blocks, and taken to the station and loaded onto the trains. And that engine, I think, was able to make 2 journeys in a day.
A lot of the granite went by sea, though, didn't it?
There was a granite went by sea. Yes, boats came up to Creetown until quite recently. The boats came up to what we call the crusher for granite chips. But way back in the days when Liverpool Dock Board were working the quarry and taking the granite from here to build Liverpool docks, I believe there was about 11 schooners sailing back and forward all the time.
Oh, that must have been a beautiful sight.
Oh yes, Creetown was a very busy place then. It has been referred to in earlier writings as the busiest town in the south of Scotland.
Was it really? It was a ferry town, wasn't it?
It was a ferry town by virtue of the fact that a ferry went back and forward to Wigtown. That was started a very long time ago. It would start nearly as soon as Creetown started. It was started to be built. Just the people wanted to find out who was on the other shore. Yes.
It's a long way round. I expect some people wish there still was a ferry there.
Oh yes, it's quite 13 miles round to Wigtown. It's only about 4 miles across the bay.
And it's often referred to, I think, isn't it, as the ferry town of Creetown?
Yes.
And using that name, you published something very special during the war, didn't you? Tell us about that.
Near the middle of the war, I would be the secretary of what we called the Creetown and Kersleuth Voluntary Services Committee, which was formed after some young people started trying to gather funds to provide comforts for the people we had in service. Then about the middle of the war, our doctor, the late John Anson Mains, wrote home and said that the one thing he thought would help the boys, if the Comforts Fund could do it, would be provide some sort of news sheet to let them know what was going on at home. And I, being a printer and secretary of the movement at the time, well, it was rather left to me to put the thing together. And I really enjoyed that, and we sent a 4-page quarto folder to everyone in service. I think there was 160 plus away from the parish. We sent that all over the world to the people, no matter where they were serving, and they really enjoyed it.
I expect it must have been a wonderful link, actually, for those serving.
Oh yes, it was a terrific thing, and we found out after the war was over it was the only one of its kind in Great Britain.
Do you still have copies of it, Drew?
I managed to make up 3 complete sets, and there are only 3 complete sets of it in existence.
It's quite an achievement to have done something like that. You must be proud of it.
Oh yes, very proud.
Because it's part of the history of the town, isn't
Yes,
it?
that is great history.
You know an awful lot about Creetown. I think you also were responsible for the local guidebook.
Yes, about 5 years ago I published a guidebook which I called Kirkmabreg Parish, and it was very well received, and I think it told the story fairly well. Being associated with newspapers all my life, I was able to dig into files and find out things that others might have not had the opportunity to get, and in that way I was able to put this together. And I feel every community should have something in print. Every now and again somebody should do things like that, because that is how history will be preserved.
Drew himself produced plays for the drama festivals for 20 or so years, winning many competitions for the Creetown Drama Club, about which we'll hear more later. He's involved in the bowling club and was the youngest member of the Creetown Royal Observer Corps when he joined, remaining a member and being chief observer when it was eventually abolished. Drew's family had links too with the next person I visited, Mrs. Margaret Balfour-Kinnear. Known to several generations of children lovingly as Mrs. B.K., she had riding stables on the hill above Creetown, which acted like a magnet to children and their parents from quite a wide radius around the town. Not originally a native of Creetown, Mrs. Balfour-Kinnear certainly made it very much her own, and I asked her first of all how long she had lived there.
About 30 years.
Why did you come here?
Came here because my family were living here. My father died, my young sister got married, and my son finished his schooling and was going to the national service. And so I came to be with my mother and do what I could in the place.
Well, you got quickly involved in local affairs, I think,
Very
didn't you?
quickly
Yes.
involved, yes. The very next spring, I was asked to stand for the county council, stand election against the sitting member who had held the seat for 9 years. So I had quite a struggle because I was a woman, and there were very few women then on the council, and I had to go and see everybody and give an election address to everybody, send one with a photograph, as well as going to call.
Well, I think you got in with a resounding majority, didn't
Very
you?
good one, yes.
Yes. What were the issues that were prevalent at the time?
I think housing after the war, there were all the old lodges at the various country houses that were falling down, and we had to have more council houses to get people comfortably rehoused. I think that was about the most important issue.
There was a secondary school in Creetown at that time too, I believe.
There was indeed. A very good headmaster, now unfortunately passed away, Mr. McQuiston, and his daughter is our local doctor, one of the local doctors, which is so nice.
Well, the continuity is interesting, isn't
It's
it?
very interesting,
Yes.
very nice for us. The county council, in its wisdom or unwisdom, decided to remove it from Creetown, and I fought very hard to keep the secondary school here, because one of the main reasons, a very good reason, was that having so many teachers in the village was very, very good for the social life of the village and having intelligent people.
Shortly after you came here, you started a riding school, didn't you?
I did.
Tell me about it.
Well, you see, I started going as an instructor to the pony club, and that was over at the Cutland. And then one of the parents came to me from here, one lady, and said, that is only for children really who can afford to have their own ponies. And I think it would be very nice if you could start someone, you've got the old stables here, something for the children that can't keep ponies for one reason or another, but would like to have the pleasure of learning to ride.
And it built up after that.
It built up enormously, because after a few years the mums and dads wanted to be taught too. And so we had adult classes in the afternoons, children's classes all the summer holidays, and every night from about March till October.
How many ponies and horses did you have in its heyday?
Oh, we never had less than 12, about 12.
And I think there are many, many children that can recall very happy times here.
I think there are, and I keep meeting them, and I don't recognise them because they've grown into mums and things like that.
What do you think made it special? Because it was special. There was a special feel about it.
Well, I think it was a nice place. Nice old stables here from 1700 and something, stables. And nice rides to go. The farmers were very good to me and let me go on their land. We were very careful. We taught them country law about gates, shutting gates and so on. And I think it was a very happy atmosphere. We had lots of competitions and heaps of games. Every lesson was finished by a game.
Some marvellous views, I think, from some of the rides, aren't
Oh
there?
yes, when you get right up the hill, look over the bay and the estuary, it's lovely.
It certainly is lovely. I've spent many marvellous hours up there on Larg Hill enjoying the children's riding lessons and gazing at the view, a never-ending source of delight. Creetown has a very special asset, for it has its very own silver band. Many places, particularly in this region of Scotland, are noted for their pipe bands. But Creetown's is different, and generations of brass instrument players have played with the Creetown silver band. I went to see Mr. John Cutland, who, as headmaster of the local primary school, has a special interest in seeing the young people come forward to keep the tradition alive, and as treasurer of the band for the past 8 or 9 years, has learnt a great deal about its history. Now over 100 years old, I asked John Cutland when exactly the band was started.
It was started in 1881, so that's 102 years.
Who was it started by?
It was started by a Mr. Barr, and he involved many of the quarry workers and his own family. It's still going strong with bars of the 6th generation in it.
There are bars still playing in it.
Still bars in it, yes.
That's amazing.
In 1881 they decided to go into brass and to set themselves up with instruments which cost them £20 for the whole band.
My goodness, you couldn't even get one instrument for that now, could you?
No, even a poor cornet costs well over £100.
Where do they get the instruments from nowadays?
The present band hasn't bought any new instruments for a long time.
They're handed down, are
They're
they?
handed down.
And what sort of things do the band do? Where do they go?
The band plays at as many charity concerts or services during the year, giving it services free. They also play at places like Newton Stewart and Gatehouse during their gala weeks. They don't go very far afield nowadays because for the last few years they have been struggling a bit.
And transport's pretty expensive
Transport's very expensive.
too. If they do so much free, then how do they manage to keep going? Where does the money come from?
They built up a very good fund that was looked after by one of the Barr family. I took over from him. And also we have had great support. Just 2 years ago we raised over £1,000 inside 3 months, mainly by donations from interested people locally, and bought the band a new uniform.
I think you were interested enough to start a youth band.
I wouldn't say I started the band, but I started brass instrument playing in the school about 12 years ago, and I have been very fortunate in that the region has provided me with 2 good instructors who come once a week, and I am even more fortunate to have a janitor who is very interested in brass band playing and spends a lot of time taking the children who love to go to him.
Are they enthusiastic?
Oh, most enthusiastic.
Do the children then move on into the adult band?
Well, that was my hope. It was rather slow for some years, but we had so many good instrumentalists that lately they have started moving into the silver band, and now I would say possibly nearly a half of the Creetown silver band are made up of my former or present pupils.
What sort of music do they play?
In school they play pop, they play Scottish. The music is what they like and what suits their abilities.
What do you think is the future for the band?
Well, I'm extremely hopeful now that We have an enthusiastic conductor. We have enthusiastic members present, and I think under Mr. McNabb the band could well reach higher spheres, higher than it has done for many years.
Although that was recorded at a band concert some time ago, I've heard them a few times recently, and it seems they're getting better and better. Earlier I mentioned Creetown's smuggling history. From the time when the first house was built in 1736, smuggling and agriculture appear to have been the principal industries carried on, particularly the former, and the rugged coastline provided a rich store of caves and hiding places for the intrepid smugglers. The famous Dirk Hattrick's cave is only a few miles along the coast towards Gatehouse, and the stories and legends abound. Willie Hughes, who was born in Creetown and lived here most of his life, is a retired customs and excise officer, so it is somewhat appropriate that his knowledge of the smuggling should be extensive, and when I went to see him it was indeed hard to know where to stop. Again, I can only give you a taste to whet the appetite. I asked Willie to tell me something about the smuggling.
There was a lot of smuggling up to about 200 years ago. In fact, there's a tale told by a traveller named Wright. He says, as I was led forward by a very good road to the village of Cree, inhabited, I presume, by smugglers, since agriculture was quite neglected, although there was a command of both lime and seashell. Those were the ingredients that they used for their fertilizers. And it appears that the farms all had horses on them, but they were used for one purpose only, and that was for leading smuggled goods away inland to the towns and cities as far afield as Edinburgh.
That's fantastic. What did they smuggle here?
Well, they smuggled all sorts of things, but salt was the main item.
Why salt?
Well, salt had a very expensive duty on it at this particular time, and it was smuggled mainly from the Isle of Man, which is only a matter of 30-odd miles away from our coast.
And why did they have so much salt?
In these days they had duty-free goods being landed there. They could sell them much cheaper than the government price.
I think you have a marvellous story actually about the salt smuggling. Can you tell us about it?
A ship arrived at the little village of Casluth, 2 or 3 miles down the coast from Creetown, with a cargo of salt. The salt was discharged and carried on the backs of men and horses to Creetown. But in the meantime, the customs officer from Newton Stewart, a Mr. McLaurin, had got wind of this arrival, and he and his followers, he would have 2 or 3 mounted officers and a company of soldiers. The soldiers being mainly recruited in the Highlands and only Gaelic speakers among them, so they had some difficulty here. They came down and they seized the cargo of salt, which was put into the kiln at the old mill, which is still visible, the ruins of which is still visible at any rate in Mill Street, Creetown. A group of soldiers was left on guard, and everything seemed to be lost, but the men were very resourceful smugglers in Creetown in those days. So they held a meeting in a nearby public house, and they formed a plan which necessitated a number of men carrying sacks of sawdust, walking along sufficiently close to the mill to be seen by the soldiers on guard, in the hope that they would desert their post and chase the bagmen.
And did they?
And they did. It worked to perfection. As soon as they saw the men with the apparently carrying further quantities of salt in their back, the soldiers took off and pursued them up Mill Street, down Harbour Street, along the fit of the yards, into Burholme Street, where a laggard was caught, and he was charged with having illegally produced salt in his possession. This chap argued with the sergeant in charge of the soldiers for at least 10 minutes, which gave the plan time to unfold itself. One of the soldiers eventually kicked the sack which had been dropped on the ground, and knew by its texture that they had been conned. They ripped it open and found it contained sawdust, rushed back to the mill, and found that in their absence every able-bodied man, and very probably every able-bodied woman in the village had been there before them, and cleared the salt out. Now from where we're sitting here, you can see where it finally was concealed. Over there behind that line of trees is Carson-Carry walled garden, and within the bounds of the walled garden a large hole was dug, and the salt was buried there. And so far as we know, it never was recovered.
It's a wonderful story.
Aye, it's a good story.
It would have made a good play, actually, wouldn't it? Good theme for a play.
It would indeed. I think if Jim Murray had got hold of that one early enough, he could have made a play out of it.
Talking of plays, you were much involved with the Creetown Drama Club for many years, weren't you, Willie?
Yes, that's so.
Tell me about it.
Since it started. Well, it started in a very odd fashion. People simply walked onto the stage and said their lines and walked back off again. There was no such thing as production. Nobody told you where to stand or sit. It must have been dreadful. What a pity there wasn't any film made of it.
It went on to greater things, didn't it?
Yes, well, primarily because of Drew's intense interest in my brother Jack, who was a good actor. We began to take the thing seriously.
And you used to take part in the drama festivals?
Oh yes,
do very
took
well.
part in all the festivals and on occasion swept the decks.
When did it sort of pack up?
I like to put it this way, it died of old age.
Very sad too. Willie, as you heard, is yet another Creetonian, immersed in the life and history of his native town. Many of them share the pride, the knowledge and the desire to pass it on, making Creetown rich for possessing such a community. For a small place, Creetown is also rich in diversity. There is a truly wonderful gem rock museum which houses the finest collection of minerals outside London, and the gemstones can be seen in both their natural state and polished. Many a fascinating hour can be spent there, marvelling at the natural evolution which has created these wonders. The granite quarry is still there, although the operation is much reduced from the years when it was the main reason for Creetown's foundation. A population of just under 1,000 supports a number of clubs and societies, including 2 football clubs, one of which is over 100 years old. There are 3 caravan parks enabling visitors to sample this fascinating corner of Galloway, and it is said of Creetonians that although they have a strong community feeling for each other, they are not clannish. They have a terrific grip on their home, but readily take the worthy stranger to their heart. An article written by a visitor summed up the character of the people of the parish thus: "Here you have not only originality, but other definite qualities which go to establish proof that this is a vivacious, volatile community, rich in old excellence and new exhilarations. It almost seems as if the next person I visited read all that and decided he would fit in well before moving to Creetown, for John Prince decidedly possesses originality, is vivacious, and delights in the town he now calls home. There is no question of his ever going away, he told me, adding that the town would be even more marvellous once the new A75 bypass was built, putting an end to the roaring lorries undermining the foundations of the houses along the main street. John Prince is a silversmith par excellence. His little shop and workshop are a great attraction, and well worth a visit just to browse and to wonder at the delicate and intricate work produced there. John's been in Creetown about 10 years. I watched him at work on a silver teapot, and asked him if he was the only person doing this sort of work in the area.
One or two others have come onto the scene, and quite a bit of competition now, which is not a bad thing.
So what sort of things do you make here?
Well, we specialise actually in sort of tailor-made goods. We have a pretty wide range to offer the public, but we do encourage them to give us their ideas, and whether it be a photograph or a drawing, and we'll make things specifically for what they like. They may see a stone like this in a box of stones, or they could bring a stone to us, and we'll design, perhaps do a few sketches for them. Although, as I say, we prefer them to tell us precisely what they want, and then we'll make a ring up for them, or a bracelet, or a necklace, or whatever, which is something you don't get in the high street jewellers.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Do you just work in silver?
No, we do a lot in gold. I was working in gold all this morning, and I've just turned over to silver this afternoon. It's one of these funny workshops, actually, where we have to clean up here. You see this little bench here. The work is done on this wee peg here, and the silver scrap or the gold scrap is brushed into there, and we keep it very, very carefully indeed. In fact, when we have people in here, we always ask them to wipe their feet on their way out, so that they leave the gold and silver behind for us to vacuum up.
And then how do you recycle it?
If it's good stuff, we'll cast it. Here you see, we've got some really first-class silver. This is 925 or sterling quality. Now, all that we can use ourselves because we do our own casting. And if for no other reason than that, we would do casting. But, of course, it's nice to be independent of the casters in Birmingham or anywhere else. And again, we make up a pattern and do our own thing. But with the inferior stuff like this, which has been contaminated or whatever, we put it into a great big iron pot, and then when in the winter when we got a log fire going, put the iron pot on the fire and burn away all the dust, having passed a magnet over it to remove bits of steel, bits of broken blade, and then that goes back to Birmingham, and we lose about 40% of its value.
You do quite a lot of ecclesiastical silver, don't you, John?
Yes, indeed. And we had the opportunity of making a chalice for the Archbishop of Glasgow to celebrate the canonization of John Ogilvie, and that was to go into the Vatican. I didn't design it. Funnily enough, the chap who designed it at the Glasgow School of Art came down here to give me very, very specific instructions as to how it was to be made. And we found out that, in fact, we'd been to the Liverpool School of Art together and missed each other by a few years, but we had the same teacher.
And recently you met the Queen, I believe.
Yes, that was up at Bewley. This is a Highland craft point set up by the Highlands and Islands people with the help of the Scottish Development Agency. And I went on some of their pilot courses because I felt I wanted to get, the latest up-to-date information so that youngsters coming out of college wouldn't have the edge on me, you see. And we found out, in fact, we are one of perhaps half a dozen people working in silver, big stuff, that is, silversmithing as such. We're a bit of a rare animal now, we're an endangered species because people can't afford £1,000 for a teapot anymore.
So you put on a demonstration for the Queen, did you, John?
Yes, I was doing the actual silversmithing part of it. Allegedly, I had an apprentice from South Uist, a laddie who had scarcely any English, in fact, and he was bashing away on a log with a mallet, forming dishes, and I was doing the subsequent raising for Her Majesty. That was a very exciting, experience altogether.
And you think Creetown's a good place to be, to have a business of this sort, is it?
Yes, we've got so many attractions here with the Gem Rock Museum and a good craft shop and fish smoker and all the rest of it. For a tiny place, it's really quite versatile.
Another much older business in the town attracted my attention, and I went to see the proprietor, James McDavid, whose family have been making kilts for several generations. Jimmy's roots are deep in Creetown, and he, like others we have talked to, has a love for the place and a thorough knowledge of its history. He's also custodian of a unique set of photograph albums, which have been painstakingly collated and labelled by John Cutland, who told us about the band. The photographs cover Creetown's early history and are brought right up to date with some magnificent pictures of the town and its surroundings today. But it was the kilt making that I went to talk to Jimmy about, and I asked him if this was the only such business in the south of Scotland.
Yes, that is correct. As far as I know, there's nobody else in Galloway that makes kilts and supplies, and the result is that, lucky for me, most of the kilts supplied in Galloway are made in Creetown.
That's really quite something special, isn't it?
Well, it's very nice, and we've been at it a long time.
How long has your family been involved in it?
It's one of the oldest family businesses in Galloway, where I am the 5th generation.
Really? And they've been making kilts all that time?
Well, it would be originally pure tailoring, and the kilt business has been evolved, I would say, during the last 60, 70 years. Before that, I think it would be pure tailoring, and then drapery and other things came into it. But in recent years, it is the kilt trade which has definitely boomed.
Mm. And you make all the jackets and waistcoats and all the
Well, we
bits and pieces?
supply all the jackets, any kilt accessories that are required, but we guarantee to all our customers that the kilts are all handmade on the premises, sewn with the real silk made by the silkworm.
Now that's marvellous.
Completely handmade.
And every tartan?
Well, most tartans, there are about 100 or so tartans readily available. If it is a special tartan, it has to be hand-woven, which creates delay, but can be done if the customer's prepared to wait.
I suppose a whole set, kilt and jackets and everything, is very expensive nowadays.
Well, yes, you start off with a kilt with 7 or 8 yards, and then you the doublet. It depends slightly which style you wear. But before you start, you should be prepared to spend about £300.
But then that will last, won't it?
Well, it should last a lifetime, and we have many instances, even recently, where the kilts we made are now passed on to the 2nd and 3rd generation and are being worn by them.
And what about the different types of jacket? Do people know what they want when they come?
Well, basically, they are prepared to ask for advice. At the moment of speaking, the Prince Charlie is the ideal thing for evening wear, weddings, etc. While, of course, if it is the Highland show, it's the Argyle tweed jacket with the tweed tie that's in vogue.
Which looks very nice, doesn't it?
Well, it all depends on the occasion, but a good-looking man, well-dressed, certainly looks as well in a kilt as he could look in anything.
Do you get many foreign visitors into Creetown?
Yes, we get quite a number of foreign visitors. The most visitors that are interested in kilts are Americans with Scotch connections. And then they come and try to trace their ancestry, and we do our best to supply them with the correct tartan or the sept of the clan to which they belong.
Do they ask you to help trace their ancestors sometimes?
Yes, if I can do it from memory or with local knowledge, it's fairly simple. But if we cannot do that, we merely look up reference books to decide which one they are entitled to wear. And of course, if they have Scotch ancestry, we're bound to end up with one.
So they buy the kilt and the full rig and take it back to America, do they?
Well, sometimes they only place the order and it is then exported to America.
Do you do much exporting?
A certain amount. It goes on every year. It varies from year to year, but this year has been very good in that connection. Sometimes it's people who belong to the Hanny clan, and as I happen to be the kilt maker for the Hannies for the world, I do get letters from Australia, America, and all you've really got to do is make sure you get the money before you send the stuff.
I'll say. It certainly broadens your horizons, doesn't it?
It does, and it's very, very interesting.
What do you think's special about Creetown?
Oh, well, of course, I belong to Creetown, and my parents belong to Creetown, and some of my grandparents, so to me it's home, and there's nowhere in the world like it.
And that seems to sum up how Creetonians generally feel about their village. There is, of course, far more that could be told, and as always, far less time than needed to do so. An article written by James Affleck in 1921 says, "Creetown is a charming little town and forms an ideal spot for a quiet, secluded summer holiday. The climate is healthy and bracing, whilst the walks and drives are simply enchanting. There you have scenes from Sir Walter Scott's delightful romance of Guy Mannering, beautifully unfolded as in a cinematograph. And the writer goes on to give a short history of the town. It does seem to have inspired many people with its warm community spirit, and I certainly felt welcomed in their midst. Once again, thank you for joining me on a visit to yet another of Galloway's interesting little towns. They're all so different from one another, and a source of continuing fascination to me. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Till next time, goodbye.